Welcome to TimeCoins, where every old coin has a heartbeat, and every piece of metal whispers stories from forgotten ages. Today on TimeCoins, we travel back to the mid-1960s, a time of music, monarchy, and money, to uncover the complete and fascinating history of the 1965 Great Britain one-penny coin, a small bronze disc that carried the pride of a nation in its simple design. The story of this penny begins long before 1965, reaching deep into the roots of British history when the penny was first born in Anglo-Saxon England over 1,000 years earlier. Back then, pennies were hand-struck from silver and used by kings and traders across an island, still finding its unity. Over time, the penny became the backbone of the British monetary system, the base unit in the pounds, shillings, and pence structure that would remain for centuries. By 1965, 1 pound equaled 240 pennies, and though the value of 1 penny was small, its importance in everyday life was enormous. The Royal Mint had been striking pennies for generations, each bearing the face of its monarch and the seated figure of Britannia, the symbol of British strength and the guardian of the seas. On the 1965 Great Britain one penny, this proud tradition continued under the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, whose youthful portrait, designed by Mary Gillick, graced the obverse of the coin. She faced right, wearing a laurel wreath instead of a crown, a symbol of grace, peace, and a new era of modern Britain. Around her portrait read the Latin inscription, Elizabeth Tude Gratia Regina FD, meaning Elizabeth II. By the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith. This was not just a coin. It was a reflection of post-war optimism and national pride in a changing world. On the reverse, the traditional design of Britannia sat proudly facing right, holding her trident and shield marked with the Union flag, gazing out over the calm seas that once carried British ships across the empire. The legend, 1 penny, appeared above her, and the date 1965 below, a design that had hardly changed for more than 100 years. Here on TimeCoins, we often say that a coin is not just metal, it's a time capsule. The 1965 penny was struck in bronze, an alloy of 97% copper, 2.5% zinc, and 0.5% tin, giving it that deep reddish tone collectors love. It weighed about 9.4 grams and measured nearly 31 millimeters across, making it large and heavy compared to today's pennies. Imagine holding one in your hand. It feels like a piece of history, substantial and real, a reminder of when money still had weight and character. More than 121 million of these coins were minted at the Royal Mint in London, ensuring they became a familiar sight in every pocket, purse, until across the United Kingdom. Despite their commonness, each coin tells its own story, of bus fares paid, cups of tea bought, or children saving pennies in their piggy banks. Dreaming of the future? By 1965, however, the future was already changing. Britain was preparing for decimalization, a complete overhaul of its ancient currency system. Plans were in motion to replace the confusing pounds, shillings, and pence structure with a simple system of 100 new pence to the pound. That meant the big bronze pennies like this one were living on borrowed time. Still, the 1965 issue represented one of the last great waves of traditional pennies before the end of an era. At TimeCoins, we love these last of their kind coins, pieces that stand at the crossroads between history and progress. In the years that followed, inflation continued to eat away at the value of the penny. By the late 1960s, its purchasing power had declined so much that it cost almost as much to make as it was worth. Yet people held on to them, not just for spending, but out of habit and sentiment. The Britannia reverse design had been used on pennies since 1797 under King George III and had come to represent stability, identity, and tradition. Even as Britain modernized, Britannia remained the guardian of the coinage. When you hold a 1965 penny today, you're touching more than metal, you're holding 168 years of design heritage. The coin's edge is plain, its surface smooth, but its symbolism runs deep: unity, continuity, and pride. The young Queen Elizabeth II portrait marked a nation recovering from the shadows of war, reaching toward a modern age and redefining its place in the world. Many collectors today seek out the 1965 penny not for its rarity, because with over 120 million minted, it's quite common, but for its historical and emotional value. On TimeCoins, we often remind our viewers that rarity isn't the only thing that gives a coin worth. Sometimes it's the story, the feeling, the connection to another time. The 1965 penny is a perfect example of that truth. In circulated condition, it's usually worth just a few pence, maybe up to £1 if well preserved. But in uncirculated mint condition, with its original reddish luster, it can fetch several dollars or pounds, especially if graded by a professional service. Some collectors even seek pennies that show natural toning, dark chocolate, brown hues, or subtle rainbow effects, as these give the coin a sense of character and age. The Numista catalog lists the coin as KM-897, and many hobbyists enjoy collecting the full run of Elizabeth II pre-decimal pennies from 1953 through 1967. Owning the 1965 penny is like owning a photograph of Britain in the mid-1960s, a country in transition, proud of its monarchy, steeped in history, and yet preparing for change. If you could travel back to 1965, you'd find this coin everywhere in the hands of factory workers, students, shopkeepers, and children buying sweets for a penny each. You'd also find that in those very years, the government was discussing how to simplify the monetary system. 6 years later, on the 15th of February 1971, decimal day arrived, and the great old pennies were withdrawn from circulation, replaced by smaller copper coins marked New Penny, the old penny, like the one dated 1965, was demonetized and became a relic of a vanished world. Yet collectors and historians have kept its memory alive. Here on TimeCoins, we believe that coins like these are not just artifacts, but living links to human experience. Each scratch and mark tells a story, maybe of a coin dropped on a cobblestone street, or one that passed through 1,000 hands before finding rest in a collector's album. Even the imagery of Britannia, seated with her trident and shield, tells a story about Britain's maritime power, its global influence, and its enduring spirit. The 1965 penny carries all that symbolism in just 9.4 grams of bronze. It's extraordinary how such a small object can hold so much meaning. From a numismatic point of view, the 1965 penny represents the continuation of the Elizabeth II First Portrait series, a portrait so iconic that it stayed on British coins until 1970 for pre-decimal issues. The sculptor Mary Gillick, who designed this obverse, intended it to reflect youth and dignity rather than grandeur, and she succeeded brilliantly. The laurel wreath recalls the imagery of ancient Rome, symbolizing peace rather than power, fitting for a monarch who ascended during an age of reconstruction and hope. Meanwhile, the reverse design by Leonard Charles Wyan connects directly back to the 19th century, demonstrating how the Royal Mint valued artistic continuity as much as technical precision. The combination of these two designs, Gillick's modern Queen and Wyan's classical Britannia, makes the 1965 penny a perfect fusion of old and new. On TimeCoins, when we showcase coins like this, we're not just talking about design. We're exploring identity. The 1965 penny mirrors Britain's journey, ancient yet evolving, proud yet humble, traditional yet ready to modernize. From the Industrial Revolution to the swinging 60s, the penny stayed loyal to its purpose, bearing witness to everything from